from a psychology of coaching perspective, what are some of the things you've picked up so far that you've already integrated into what you do because of how valuable it's been, or maybe it's brought on a certain shift in your perspective in the matter?
Yeah, I think a big thing that a lot of coaches should probably understand at least like a base level, like they don't need to go back to school. I'm just an extremist and kind of thought it would be fun. I'm now 3/4 into it and kind of wish I would have just read more books, but I definitely think like, self-determination theory is a huge one. A better understanding of the BPS, the biopsychosocial model, is going to be big for a lot of people. And I think that's the biggest thing that I'm looking at, from athlete or client perspective, is like when they're coming into a training environment, like what is their threat response, right? Because when we start looking at threat response, we start looking at like just their perception of the environment and the task at hand. Like that's going to ramp up their autonomics, which is also going to ramp up their ability to, apply physical movement and physiology at that point, right? Like if somebody is coming into a session or coming into a practice or whatever, and we've got somebody who's just hyper sympathetic at that point, like that's going to affect their ability to problem solve. That's going to maybe, again, increase anxiety, increase, hypervigilance, whatever. And from a cognitive perspective, they're not going to be as tactical, if they are playing a sport that requires reaction. And if we're looking at it from a physiological perspective, if you got somebody who is, again, hypersympathetic, we're talking about increased blood pressure, we're talking about increased resting heart rate. Well, all of those things also decrease recovery. So if you've got somebody who's trying to attempt something extremely aerobic, like being hypersympathetic is not like, that's not the move. Like they're not going to be able to come down, right? And they're going to be expending a ton of extra energy simply because their psychological perception of the environment is that threatening or again, that anticipatory. So I want to make sure that I can kind of figure that out for people. And if it takes reframing or visualization, that's something I can maybe talk them through. But for a lot of clients, it might also just be, maybe kind of changing or dictating how they, their positioning within the actual training environment, right? Or what that assessment process looks like when I first meet a new client. Something we go over in like our group mentorship is just looking at like, right, like take them someplace where they don't feel all the eyes on them. Like you're probably going to get a much different assessment score from that perspective, right? If you've got somebody who's extremely extroverted, like don't take them in the private training room, because that's going to freak them out a little bit. Like keep them out on the gym floor, right? Like just try to find some of those simple preferences and match them, from that perspective. And I think even being able to do that sets the tone really early on in the relationship between the client and the coach, and lets them know that you do have a better understanding of maybe what their preferences or biases are, even if they are subconscious, right? They sometimes, clients or athletes just feel like, oh yeah, that coach just gets me. Right. And maybe they do, maybe they have a similar bias, or maybe they're just paying attention and they're adapting their strategies to what they think that you'll like the best. And I think that's a big deal for me, is that the autonomics are going to drive a lot of the psychological, just again, perception of what training is, what the training environment is, and what the task demands are.
Have you had a chance to use Omega Wave to monitor those things from a day-to-day perspective?
Yeah, I used Omega Wave on myself and clients for almost 3 years. And the last job I was at in New York, we were using a lot. We were consulting with actual executive teams, like high-level executive teams within the corporate sector. And I was doing some consulting there. And that's kind of when I got into the psychology component of things as well. I was working with a behavioral psychologist. We were running behavioral archetypes, specifically the DISC on people, and kind of trying to get a better understanding of what their biases and inherent preferences were just based on environment and communication. And then I was running Omega Wave on everybody and building out training programs. And between, even just like looking at teams and them understanding their peers communicate, like preferred communication strategies, and understanding that, everybody cared and everybody was in this program. We started looking at just like, again, everything from work performance to physiology. We were also running blood work on them every 3 months. So we were just looking at, stress markers and androgenous sex hormones, things of that nature, that would be key indicators of their autonomic state. And like everything started getting better, their training started getting better. Right. And I think when you start looking at like variability from any spectrum, but especially like heart rate variability, like what we see a lot of it is if somebody's higher sympathetic, right, they're always going to be craving that high intensity work because their threshold for that is so high, right? It's just like, it's like any drug, like drugs affect, neurotransmitters and hormones, right? Like you need more of it to get the same response over time, right? So if you've got someone who's already swimming super high on the sympathetic curve, like they're going to be craving training that's much higher stimulus. And physically, they might not be prepared for that, right? Is what we run into a lot of the time. So if we can take them down to a more variability state where they're getting a little more parasympathetic through the day and they have kind of spurts of both sympathetic and parasympathetic tone, and they're kind of just neutralizing with a good variability rate, now we can look at, okay, I can drive training. I can give you a higher stimulus without me reaching max stimulus, because we've now changed the goalpost and we're starting from a lower perspective. And now I can apply a more appropriate amount of stimulus to help you get that sympathetic tone, get that craving, get that intensity, get that output without digging a deeper hole for you, right? And that allowed, the HRV and the omega waves specifically, and I do like that system, that allowed me to just better monitor that, and at the same time, I do feel like people also sometimes, become too dependent on HRV, from a training perspective. I think that's the other, that's the other end of the equation, where you almost get a fragility mindset with some people where they're like, oh man, if I'm not in 4 greens, like I can't, like I need to just go for a walk. Right. Like my windows of trainability are like, I got a yellow in there. Like I can't go all out. So I'm going to completely moderate my training program and do something lower intensity. And what we find, from a training perspective is, man, you also got to learn how to train in the reds, right? You don't do it every day. But if you want to build that resilience, game day happens in the reds some days. You can't sit out just because your omega web score is low, right? Exactly. So, so I think from that perspective, I think too many people try to change the training rather than changing the lifestyle around it, right? Because in my experience, outside of like higher level athletes, most people don't train hard enough to actually disrupt their autonomics that much. Right. Yeah. And like, it's like, hey man, like you train 3 hours a week and you work like kind of hard. I don't think that's the reason like your HRV scores are a little disrupted. Like, let's talk about like happy hour and maybe staying up too late. Right. Or maybe you just, if you're a collegiate athlete, like maybe it's finals week. Cool. Like maybe your girlfriend broke up with you. I don't know. Like there can be a lot of things at that point that might be disrupting those scores and creating extra stress in your life. And it's probably not training with a lot of people, so for me, it's like, I don't want to change or moderate the wrong stimulus and just end up detraining somebody without actually trying to like find the problem itself and from a lifestyle perspective. So I think anyone who's using those systems, just, they need to step out of their trainer brain and also and back into like their human being brain, and also look at those other covariables from an environmental or lifestyle perspective.
Yeah. I remember speaking to Aaron Davis about this, and what he said was like, you look at the HRV and then you don't do anything about it. You just, it's there. And if you need to go back to it and there's really something that's going wrong, then you can maybe lean onto it a little bit, but otherwise don't let it lead your life. And like you said, there's some other environmental factors that are going to have a tremendous effect on those scores beyond the few hours that you train in the week.
Yeah, Aaron's a brilliant dude. Like that, I got a chance to meet him down in Costa Rica. Ben House's first seminar. He's a guy that I really admire in the field, and I wish more people knew about. But that's just not who he is, which is cool. I wish he was out there a little bit more. But But yeah, it's like the HRV stuff. It's like, you just have to look at long-term trends. Right. And that's something I learned also in running it on myself. Like when I was really deep entrenched on it, the funny story is, like, I was helping Pat beta test Mass 2
Yeah.
In New York. And I was like, hey man, like my Omega Waves scores suck like every day. is there like something we can do here? And he's like, honestly, man, like if your scores don't suck, you're not doing the program right. And it's like, fair enough, man. I guess I'll recover on the weekend. Like, we're good. I think that was kind of an eye-opening moment to me too, is if you are truly training hard, which that program was, and you're going to have some disruption, and that's probably okay. What you look at is, like you said, if you've got like really steady scores over the course of, months, and you start seeing like a major just disruption for, 3, 4, 5, 10 days at a time. Well, now we actually need to start looking at things and to gain a better understanding or insight into what that might be. And the questions I'm always going to ask first are going to be lifestyle related, because I probably have a pretty good idea of what their training looks like. And if everything's good there, then I'm going to look at training as a secondary marker.
Beyond your 2 eyes, 2 ears, HRV and Omega Wave, do you use any other monitoring tools, or have you in the past?
Yeah. I mean, not so much. A lot of it is just, I use like subjective daily, questionnaires, and that usually gives me a pretty good understanding of people as well. And just, again, not only like where they actually sit, but, where they see themselves sitting, right? What their perception of it is. And you start again noticing trends over time with that, where you'll get some people who, if I'm doing like a 1 to 5 score on just, readiness or sleep or whatever, like, hey, you're 5s every day. Like, cool. Like, really? It's like one of those things. And it's like, but that's also data for me, where it's like, okay, like this is a client who wants to impress me. Right. And that's a whole nother form of data. And that allows me to better communicate with them and give them feedback as well. Right. So I think it's just, the data is great, but it's what you can extrapolate from it and what you can actually use it towards, so I don't go super crazy in it. I think there's a lot of systems that I think are pretty cool. Like I'd like to know more about the Moxie and some things of that nature. And I've talked with Aaron about it and some other people who use it to gain, a little better understanding on some things. And I think that's a pretty cool tool, and it's something that, you can look at. And, that's the interesting thing with that, which kind of, again, delves into psychology a little bit, is when I talked with Aaron about it, and talking about how, you can look at it in comparison to like the central governor, theory, right? Where it's like, people think they're gassed out long before they actually are from a physiological perspective. And, he pointed me in the direction of like the book Endure off of that from, I believe it's Alex Hutchinson, which is a fantastic book as well. Kind of going over some anecdotes and stories and just studies and findings and research given that. But I think that's a great way to show like real data based on like, again, psychological perception of, fatigue, right? And how you manage and regulate those things. So there's definitely some cool stuff out there. I don't have access to most of it at this point, and most of my clients don't either. So I kind of rely on just daily questionnaires at this point, and then just talking to them and getting a lot of feedback. Matt and I both talk to our clients on a weekly basis to really gain a better understanding of like their perception of the programs in comparison to what their numbers are looking like, getting an idea of, again, what their RPE looks like, and kind of gaining a better understanding of like their perception of effort, especially from an intensity perspective. And again, almost exclusively our clients are coaches and athletes. So they're trained individuals. They're people, like when we talk RPE with them, like they understand RPE pretty well, and they're pretty truthful about it. So again, there's some demographic bias there. That might not be how I approach, my older New York clientele from, 10 years ago when I'm working with, stay-at-home moms and accountants. We're probably not going to go RPE style there, but with this group, we probably can and do a pretty good job from an accurate perspective there.